It's 1940, and there's a serial killer on the streets of Berlin, looking for his next victim. Elfriede Franke is traveling home on the late train after work. Sitting alone in the dark carriage, she stares out of the window as the train pulls into a station. Another passenger gets on board. Curious, but unable to make out their features, Elfriede continues to stare out at pitch black as the train departs. The stranger quietly approaches Elfriede, and before she can sense danger, she feels a cold, hard, and heavy object strike her. She was not the first, and wouldn't be the last victim of the S-Bahn murderer. This is a true story about the crimes of a mass murderer who assaulted and fatally attacked women on a killing spree that lasted 9 months. Despite a thorough investigation, how did the killer evade the police for so long? Why did the Nazi high command want to keep it a secret? And how did they finally catch him?
In any serial killing, one murder happens after another. The police are bound to be under tremendous pressure. When it's happening in the capital of the Third Reich, you're under pressure from people who can have you killed, who can make you disappear.
He had, of course, been interviewed before by the police. He was someone who they considered to be very much the backbone of Nazi Germany.
When the skulls were revealed, it would have been a confrontation with the physicality of what he'd done. What they were trying to do is to kind of say, we have you.
You're listening to Forbidden History, the podcast series that explores the past's darkest corners, sheds light on the lives of intriguing individuals, and uncovers the truth buried deep in history's most controversial legacies. I'm Janine Hironi, and this is the S-Bahn murderer, a serial killer in Nazi Berlin. In this episode, we investigate a criminal case which baffled detectives in 1940s Berlin, when a string of violent attacks against women took place in and around the city's latest train network. Under the new Nazi government, construction of the Berlin S-Bahn commenced in 1934. The last phase of the project was finally completed in 1939, 1 month after the start of the Second World War. Roger Morehouse is a historian and author.
The S-Bahn, the S comes from Schnell, meaning fast. It's basically an overground suburban railway. There's a network of S-Bahn lines that runs right across Berlin, still does. It goes right out into the suburbs and runs till very late at night.
The S-Bahn was vital to the German war effort, transporting workers to and from the factories around Berlin. But as the war progressed and more German men left for the front line, it was up to the women of Berlin to continue the fight on the home front.
So women are being called into industrial work for the first time. So there's a greater proportion of women riding the S-Bahn on a daily basis.
But with its factories, infrastructure, and prominent position within the Reich, Berlin was an obvious target for the Allies. And its location was well within striking distance of the British RAF bombers. When war broke out in September 1939, a blackout order was given. And while it served to hinder the accuracy of aerial bombers, it also created an environment in which crime was able to thrive.
There is an upsurge in crime, robbery, prostitution, all of that stuff. And there's a massive spike in accidental death. Car accidents, people falling on train tracks, people falling in front of trams. On average, in the winter of 1940, there is one person being killed every night in Berlin, thanks to accidents in the blackout. So you have a huge amount of deaths for the police to sift through.
But in early December of 1940, Dr. Waldemar Weimann, A renowned forensic pathologist was called to the scene of a body found by the tracks of the S-Bahn. The woman was identified as Elfriede Franke, and at first glance, it seemed possible that she'd accidentally fallen from a moving train. But on closer examination, he noticed her head wounds were inconsistent with the theory of accidental death. She had an impression break on the roof of the skull, and Dr. Wyman concluded this was likely to be the result of an object or weapon. He didn't have to wait long to confirm his suspicions. That same evening, he received another corpse into the morgue. Nothing unusual for wartime Berlin, except this lady was found close by and bore a similar head wound. 2 women found dead on the same day, in the same place, and with the same injury. This was the moment Dr. Wyman realized they were victims of the same perpetrator, and he reported it to the police. Author David Thomas.
The first time it all starts coming together is in the double killing. And the reason that's important is that one of the killings has taken place on a street, by the railway lines, but on a street. And the other one, the woman has clearly been thrown from the S-Bahn. And they're only a few hundred meters apart. And so the picture starts beginning to come together.
The second body was identified as 19-year-old Irmgard Fries. She'd been walking home alone at night and close to the Berlin Karlshorst railway station. It had been no more than 30 minutes since the killer had last struck. But this was only the beginning. Roger Morehouse.
2 murders in a single day. One on the train and one next to the train tracks. And at that point, the police realized that they have a serial killer on their hands.
A crime of this nature was a serious concern to the Nazi Party, because they didn't want to cause a public panic and risk disrupting the war effort. So the case was quickly picked up by the German criminal police force, known as the Kripo. Kripo is short for Kriminalpolizei, or the criminal police. They were the old-fashioned police detective investigation branch, and leading the investigation was revered police commissioner Wilhelm Lüdke of the Serious Crimes Unit in Berlin. A promising young student, Lüdke climbed the ranks in the police force until his political beliefs got in the way of his career. He was an alleged German Democratic Party voter, which, amongst other things, sought to protect the rights of Jews and ethnic minorities. But in 1939, it's claimed he was forced to abandon his principles and become a Nazi Party member to secure his promotion. The party knew, regardless of politics, Lüdke's credentials made him the right man for the job. David Thomas again.
He had solved more murders than any other serving detective. So you have to think of Lüdke as being like one of the top detectives in Germany, a really experienced, hard-nosed professional.
Accomplished and respected, Lüdke led the murder squad dedicated to launching the biggest manhunt Berlin had ever seen. They wanted to make a public appeal for witnesses to come forward, but also make sure that women traveling on the S-Bahn remained vigilant while the murderer was still at large. However, the Reich Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, wanted an altogether different approach.